We are the Pleiadian High Council of Seven, and we are pleased to offer you our words of wisdom. We are particularly happy to be called upon to give you the bedtime story that we have been asked to give here. There is, of course, a need for alternative stories to the ones that have been told on Earth for hundreds of years, even thousands in some cases, because your children are evolving. They are becoming smarter, more tuned in, and they require more from you. So here's our story. Once upon a time, there were two friends living on planet Earth. They were teenage boys. One named Justin and the other named Eddie. On Eddie's 14th birthday, the boys had coerced the parents of each of them to let them go on a long hike that would lead to some very magical waterfalls. And they convinced the parents to let them camp overnight without supervision. Now, part of the reason why the parents were okay with this request was because Justin was a couple of years older. He was 16 and he had his license, and he was trustworthy. So the boys left for their camping trip. And they drove into the mountains where Justin parked his car, and he and Eddie got their camping gear and embarked upon the journey of this hike and camping trip and excursion to the magical waterfalls. Now, the two boys had been best of friends for a very long time because they lived right next door to each other. And even though they were best of friends, they were different. Justin was very grounded. He was very heart-centered. He didn't mind that Eddie was 2 years younger, even though it wasn't cool to be hanging out with a freshman. And we're talking about high school here, for those of you who do not understand that particular designation. And so, Eddie was more in his head and very interested in extraterrestrials. He would regularly go on the internet and read about different types of extraterrestrials, watch YouTube videos, draw extraterrestrials, and fantasize about what it would be like to meet one and have ET contact for the first time. Justin, on the other hand, was more interested in girls and sports and community service. He loved to give back to humanity because he felt very fortunate to be living the life that he was living. And so the boys embarked upon their very long hike that would require them to stop and camp out along the way. And as was usually the case, Eddie was talking about extraterrestrials and his favorite science fiction shows, not really paying attention to the beauty around him, not really tuning into the energy of the trees, the sun, and the stream that they were walking along on their hike. But Justin was very present, very grounded, paying close attention to the surroundings, sound of the birds singing, spotting the occasional fox. And Eddie was very happy to be hiking with his best friend on his birthday, but also very preoccupied with his infatuation with all things extraterrestrial. And one of the reasons why Eddie wanted this particular gift from Justin for his birthday was because he thought if they went out far enough into the wilderness and stared up at the night sky, they would be more likely to have a visitation from some extraterrestrial beings. And as they continued to hike along, the trail got less and less distinguishable. It was harder to see exactly where the trail was and how to stay on it. There were several crossings of the stream that were required. And Justin used his intuition more so than his mind to guide them. At times, Eddie would try to figure things out using his mind and suggest they go this way or that way. And sometimes Justin would humor him and allow himself to be led in the wrong direction, knowing all along, because of his internal guidance, which way they needed to go to get to their destination. For this night, their destination was just a smooth site where they could put up their tent. It wouldn't be an official campsite, mind you, but it was a place that he knew where they could get to and put the tent up on level ground and sleep comfortably for the night. And eventually, it got dark enough to where they needed to get to that spot. And Justin led the way. Eddie reluctantly followed, knowing that his friend was usually the one who had the right direction. And this had him feeling a bit less than self-confident. But he was happy to be having this hike and this camping trip with his best friend. So they made it to the spot that was perfect for setting up a tent right around sunset. And they set it up and they built a fire and they lit the fire and they talked about girls and sports, and Eddie talked about ETs and science fiction shows. They talked about who they wanted to be when they grew up, where they wanted to go to college, and so on. And then they laid their sleeping bags out outside of the tent to stare up at the stars. And as they talked about the different stars and constellations and where was this and that, they could see things moving in the sky. They could see lights, different colored lights, green and red and blue and purple. And then those lights got closer and closer to where they became more distinguishable. And the blue light came closest as the others stayed far up in the atmosphere. And as the blue light got closer and closer, it became clear it was a spaceship. Eddie was beside himself with joy. And the ship was small enough to land right by their tent. It was so small, in fact, they wondered how any being could fit inside there. And after it landed, it opened a small door, and out came a very small extraterrestrial being. And this being pointed to Justin and then held out its palm. And from the palm of the ET's hand shone a light, like a very small flashlight. And the light shone directly onto Justin's third eye. And Justin could feel his third eye getting activated, opened. He could see both inside and outside of his head much more than he could just a few moments ago. And this ET being eventually put its hand down and got back in the ship. And the ship rose up from the ground and flew back to its fleet. And they were gone in the night sky. Now, as excited as Eddie was to have this UFO and ET experience, he was equally as disappointed that Justin got the third eye activation and he didn't. And he asked Justin question after question about it. What was it? What's happening? Why didn't they give it to me? And Justin calmly answered that the ET was telling him that his friend wasn't ready for the activation. Now, the jealousy within Eddie was almost too much for him to bear, but at the same time, he had a certain amount of happiness for his friend. Justin now could see fairies, elementals, elves, dwarves. When he closed his eyes, he could see more color. He could see shapes, symbols, glyphs. He was activated. He could see past lives. He could see down different timelines. He was having the time of his life, and at the same time didn't want to let on about just how magical the experience was because of his young friend who was still reeling from not getting his own activation. So neither of them slept that night. They didn't even get inside the tent. They stayed up. Eddie asked questions. Justin tried his best to relay what it was he was experiencing, what it was like to get the activation. And he also attempted to reassure Eddie that someday he was sure that he would be ready for the same. So as soon as the sun was up, the boys packed up their gear and continued on in their journey to the magical place with the waterfalls. And the hike was almost a repeat of the previous day's hike, except this time Justin knew with much more clarity where they were going. They never got led astray from the trail, which at times needed them to walk right in the stream to stay on. And Justin also knew which berries were safe to pick, what greens they could nibble on as well, what water was safe to drink. And Eddie was busy processing his emotions about not being ready for the activation, not really enjoying himself much at this point. But the waterfalls rather, would be quite spectacular. And he knew that he had that to look forward to. Through the expert guidance that Justin was providing as the leader of the hike, they made it to the waterfalls by noon, when the sun was at its peak. And they enjoyed swimming and playing, jumping from heights into the water. The pool of water was the most crystal clear, pure water you could imagine. They had received a lot of rain that spring, and so there was plenty of water. And the waterfall was very big. The very biggest waterfall was thick and strong, and there were lots of little waterfalls around as well. And so the boys enjoyed their time there. They ate their lunch. They basked in the sun. And Justin could see the fairies that were there with them. And while they were not quite physical, they were quite alluring to this teenage boy who had all of those hormones running through him. He tried not to make a big scene about it, however, as he knew Eddie would be jealous to know that there were fairies there that he couldn't see. And so it was a magical experience, to say the least. and one that not many teenage boys would give themselves, as they were too busy playing video games and being on the internet. Now, eventually it became time for them to turn back and go to the campsite, where they would both certainly want to get some sleep. And so they gathered their things and they began the hike back, arriving at their little campsite at around sunset time once again. And once they arrived, Justin could feel that there was something off. He could feel that there were eyes upon them, that something wasn't right. And so, using his ability to see, he scanned the area. And lo and behold, there was a cougar that had been tracking them, had been following them ever since the waterfall. And so Justin, once again, not wanting to alarm Eddie, slowly made his way over to his friend and told him what he could see and pointed in the direction of the cougar. As soon as Eddie's eyes locked onto the cougars, he wanted to run. But Justin grabbed onto his arm and told him that they definitely should not run away or they would be chased. He knew from his internal guidance that the best thing to do would be for the two of them to look big and scary. And so he found two rather thick sticks, branches really, to hold in his hands and hold up in the air. And he convinced Eddie to climb onto his back to make them look bigger and stronger and more imposing. And when they had their setup all complete, Justin moved towards the cougar and growled and howled and made the scariest sounds he could think to make. And at first, Eddie was terrified at this strategy, but eventually he could see the cougar was backing away. And he got into it with his friend. And they made the loudest, scariest sounds they could. And eventually they saw the cougar running off, leaving them alone. And when the cougar was gone, Eddie asked his friend where he had learned about that. And Justin said that he didn't know. He didn't read about it. He didn't see anything about it, but it just came to him in the moment. He just knew that this was what they needed to do to survive. And so they made their dinner. They made their fire. The sun went down completely, and again the night sky was filled with stars. Eddie was determined to have another sighting, to have another visitation, to get his activation. He could see how much it had affected his friend in a very positive way. And they looked up at the sky and at the stars and wondered who else was out there, who else was up there, who could visit them. But that night they saw only stars and a sliver of the moon. And eventually around midnight, they were so tired, they both crawled into the tent and slept well past sunrise. They packed up their gear in the morning, made sure there were no smoldering ashes in their campfire, and they made their way back down the hike, down the trail, back to where they parked their car. And again, Justin led the way. He knew exactly where to go, when to cross the stream, when to walk directly down the stream. And Eddie was quiet, eerily quiet for most of the hike back to the car. And again, Justin was holding back on telling him about all of the different beautiful fairy beings that he could see, and all of the beautiful colors and lights he could see when he closed his eyes. And they drove home in Justin's car, and finally Eddie spoke up. And he said, "Why do you think the alien chose you and not me? Why do you think I'm not ready?" And Justin waited until he found the right words, until his intuitive sense told him exactly what to say. And he turned to his friend and he said, "I believe that it's important for you to feel more. I believe that it's important for you to turn off your computer and your television and go within. I believe it's important for you to feel whatever you're feeling, especially now that you've had this experience. And it's bringing up a lot of emotions within you. And I can feel that you're feeling some of them, but not all of them. I know that you have the ability to do this, and I've seen you at times really access your inner realm. So if you ever need my help, if you ever want to meditate together, just ask me." And Eddie thought about it for a while. He was quiet again. And eventually he spoke up and said, "Yes, I think you're right." And so the boys got home. Justin dropped Eddie off at his house first, and they made a plan to get together and meditate once a day after school before dinner time. And they did. They kept that arrangement, and Eddie could feel himself opening up like a flower, could feel himself becoming more sensitive, more in tune with his environment. And eventually, Eddie's third eye opened all by itself. He didn't need the activation from the ET being. He could see with his eyes open more than the average human, and he could see with his eyes closed beautiful colors, shapes, past life memories. Could see down different timelines. He had become like his friend Justin, very awake. He thought he had been awake already because he knew about extraterrestrials and government conspiracies and cover-ups. He knew about the Illuminati and all of the secrets that were kept from humanity because of how much time he spent on the internet. But he had never truly felt himself awaken until he went within, like his friend, his mentor, who had been there all along, always willing to help him. And so now the boys could connect on a much deeper and higher level as they had their activated, open, and upgraded third eyes. And in the years that followed, they were able to help others as well. It deepened their friendship. It made them better boyfriends to the girls that they would meet. And eventually they went on to lead very happy and healthy lives. And they always remained very close friends. And then one day when Eddie was 40 years old, the ET came to him in the same way that he had come on that camping trip in that tiny spaceship, and came out of that ship, Eddie now married, father of two. And the little ET came right up to him and sat down next to him. And instead of giving Eddie an activation, they simply meditated together. They felt each other. They telepathically communicated, and they established a friendship. One that Eddie would keep, as they would stay in touch telepathically even after the little ET got back on his ship and went away. And Eddie lived a long and fulfilling life. We are the Pleiadian High Council of Seven, and we are very fond of all of you. That is all.
Hi everyone, this is Daniel Scranton. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like and share this video, and give a visit to danielscranton.com when you get a chance.